Thomas had no intention of stopping. Not because of the storm, not because of the memories, and certainly not because of that old road, the one that still carried the scent of wet pine, dried blood, and the rusty metallic call of a memory he had buried 7 years ago. But then, he saw it. A small creature lying motionless under the rain as if the world had forgotten it ever existed. Its back arched, legs curled in, fur soaked and dark like wet stone. A bobcat, so frail that for a moment Thomas thought he was looking at a shadow. He hit the brakes, hard and decisive. The car skidded slightly on the muddy road. Rain tapped against the windshield like cold fingers trying to drag him back to reality. But reality now lay before him, soaked, trembling, and looking at him. Not afraid, not growling, just a gaze, deep like the woods in December. Thomas stepped out, his shoulders quickly soaked, his boots sinking into the muddy ground. The bobcat didn't flee. It only turned its head, tilted an ear, then looked at him as if it had been waiting for a long time. That look wasn't instinctual. It was something that once was. He dropped to his knees beside the wild creature, breath catching. A name escaped his lips like a confession. Ash. A name he hadn't dared utter since the day that steel trap snapped shut behind the house. The day they told him, that bobcat's been released back into the wild. It won't survive. But now, Ash was here. Flesh and blood, so thin that every rib jutted out like blades, one leg crooked, eyes still locked on him. Not accusing, not pleading, just waiting. And then it let out a faint rasp. Weak, but enough to crack Thomas's heart wide open. A sound from the place where faith had once been abandoned. Thomas took off his coat, his hands trembling as he wrapped the cold, wet body of Ash. The bobcat didn't resist, didn't fear. It just leaned its head into the crook of his arm, gently, as if the world had finally gotten one thing right. He had come back. He lifted it, slowly, and carried it to the car. The bobcat lay still on the passenger seat, eyes staring through the rain-streaked window as if it still couldn't believe this was real. When Thomas shut the door, sat behind the wheel and started the engine, he realized the road ahead wasn't for leaving anymore. It was the road home to something that had been waiting for him for 7 years. And deep in his heart, a question rose, sharp as the cold wind. Why did they tell me it was dead? Ash was exhausted in a way no medicine could heal. Not from wounds, but from years of carrying the weight of being forgotten. Thomas checked into the motel with a nod and a cold credit card. No questions about the pet policy. No concerns. Room 4, ground floor, close to the door. Good enough. The room smelled of old wood, heating oil, and something faintly sweet. Maybe maple syrup. Like a patchwork quilt from childhood, worn but still warm enough to hold back the drift. He laid Ash on a folded blanket beneath the heater. Steam rose from its drenched fur like the last breath of a soul too tired to fight. There was no sound, but not the awkward kind of silence. This was silence with weight, as if the past was sitting between them. Thomas crouched, carefully wiping the tangled fur, checking every claw, every scratch. Ash didn't resist, didn't snarl, just kept its eyes open, watching him. Not with fear, but with something close to belief that hadn't yet dared speak. As if this bobcat still didn't believe it had found its way back, or that the one who came back was real. Thomas placed a bowl of water and some food nearby. Ash didn't touch them. Its ribs jutted like rusted windmill blades beneath thin skin, hips sharp as if carved by hunger and loss. But it didn't cry, didn't beg, just lay there as if it had learned that begging changed nothing. Thomas dropped into the room's only wooden chair, eyes fixed on the space between them. His voice cracked, uncertain whether he spoke to himself or to the rain outside the window. "I don't know what this is, but if you're really Ash, then someone lied." Ash blinked slowly. Then, as if by reflex, or maybe a miracle, it stretched out a paw and lightly tapped its claw against his boot. A small gesture, but it hit like an explosion. Not random, not instinct, but a choice. A wordless message. I'm still here, and maybe, just maybe, things can still be saved. Thomas leaned in, breath trembling. "Is it really you?" Ash didn't move, but its gaze never left him. There was no hatred, no blame in that look, just a quiet presence, defying years, defying the forests that had come and gone. When dawn crept through the fogged window, everything lit up with a gentle confession. Thomas drew the curtain. Light fell across Ash's neck, revealing an old leather collar beneath the mud and matted fur. An inscription, faint. Hollow Creek, the name of a wildlife rehabilitation center. In a place Thomas hadn't thought about in 7 years. His chest tightened. Why that place? Who took Ash there? Who decided in his place? And most importantly, why didn't anyone say anything? Ash lapped a few cautious sips of water. Thomas smiled, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. Because he knew. They had only brushed the dust off the surface. The truth had been buried. But Ash, somehow, had survived it. Now it was time for Thomas to dig it up, piece by piece. The next morning, the sky was clearer, but his heart was not. Sunlight pierced the window like an uninvited guest, shining on the blanket where Ash lay curled, legs tucked in like an old soldier guarding a memory. Thomas knelt down, sat beside him. Ash began to nibble a few bites slowly, as if still unsure that safety could be real. He pulled a crumpled slip of paper from his pocket, written hastily the night before. Hollow Creek Center. And he stepped out, not to leave the past behind, but to knock on its door. The middle-aged woman in the ash-gray medical scrubs looked at Thomas with an expression half suspicious, half wary. The kind strangers usually reserve for those who bring wild animals. But that look softened almost immediately when he spoke. About Ash, about the rain, about the gaze, about the name that had slipped out without thought. She leaned down, resting her elbows on the counter, looking directly into Ash's deep, golden eyes, then whispered something Thomas couldn't hear, as if she were speaking to the spirit of the animal, not just fur and flesh. She led them to the back. The examination took place in silence and respect. 7, maybe 8 years old, she said, checking the heartbeat and muscle tone. For a wild bobcat that's been in captivity, surviving this long is rare. She fell quiet, her hand resting lightly on Ash's chest. But his heart is still beating, faintly, but clearly. There's still a reason to fight. Thomas glanced over at Ash, caught that familiar look again, a look that seemed to say, "We both know this isn't over." "Have you ever seen an animal from Hollow Creek?" he asked. "Or has that name shown up in any of the transfer or treatment records here?" Dr. Foster quietly opened her computer, clicking through record logs. This month, last year, then even the old scanned archives. She shook her head. Nothing. If he was ever there, someone cleaned the trail. Thomas left his phone number, thanked her, then stepped outside. The day had dipped into afternoon, sunlight smearing like metal across the cold pavement. On the way back to the motel, the town began to whisper. The mechanic outside the garage dropped his wrench when Ash limped past. "Damn it. No way," he muttered. A woman folding linens on her porch paused, whispering, "Looks just like the Grady Bobcat, the one that vanished after that accident." Thomas heard every word like tiny thorns. He didn't look back, but the fragments of memory began forming a picture, and that picture was trembling with rage. That night, in the old motel room, Thomas sat on the bed, Ash curled beside the heater. He opened his laptop, digging through every public record related to Hollow Creek. Animal transfer logs, lists of unreleasable individuals, behavioral assessments. Nothing, until he opened an old PDF, a scan from a local archive. Blurry, torn edges, but still readable. File number 107th. Male Bobcat. Adult. No tag. Notes. Aggressive, unmanageable. Recommendation, transfer or euthanasia. No photo. Just one hurried handwritten word in the margin. Transferred. Transferred where? Who signed off? Who decided? That night, Thomas drove to the one place he had sworn never to return. The old Grady family house. Overgrown driveway, boarded windows. The house still stood, silent and heavy with secrets, as if it too was holding something back. Thomas turned off the engine, got out, looked straight at the porch that had witnessed many winters. Ash lifted his head. Didn't wait. He leapt from the car, slowly walked to the steps, then sat. No sniffing, no searching, just stared at the door, and let out a low whimper. A sound as thin as wind, but as heavy as a grief untouched for 7 years. An old man appeared with white hair, a grocery bag in hand, and stopped in his tracks. Didn't think I'd see him again, he said softly. Thomas turned. What did you say? This is your place, right? After the accident, that Bobcat kept coming back, sat right there on that step, cried, screamed, then vanished. I thought he gave up. Thomas clenched his fists. Ash never gave up. He was taken. A few days later, Thomas stood in front of the old storage unit, hand trembling around the key, not from cold, but from what was about to be uncovered. The metal door screeched open. Dust, rusted metal, the scent of passing years. Thomas stepped in. Items slanted like memories waiting to be named. A moss green filing cabinet, broken lock, the same cabinet from his father's garage. Next to the red toolbox, and the bucket of tennis balls Ash used to play with. Thomas opened the cabinet. Amid stacks of old papers, faded receipts, and yellowed photos, a yellow envelope emerged. Curled corners, sealed with old tape. On the front, Thomas, scribbled in a crooked hand. Not his father's, not his mother's. He picked it up. His heart thudded as if someone were knocking from the inside. Thomas knelt, opened the rusted cabinet further, sifting through old paper layers, worn receipts, crumpled photos, and bent license plates like shattered memories. And then he saw it. A yellow envelope, its edge curled with age, sealed with aged tape. On its surface, a familiar scrawl. Thomas. The handwriting was familiar, but not his father's, not his mother's. He held it under the dim light of his flashlight, and his heart stopped. It was Martin. Inside were only 2 sheets of paper. No greeting, no apology. Just dry lines, like a report. After the accident, Ash became unmanageable. Wouldn't eat, wouldn't let anyone near the house. We decided to transfer him to a treatment facility near Hollow Creek, specializing in trauma recovery for wildlife. He was recorded as case number 107. We hoped someone would adopt him. I didn't want you to know. You'd already been through enough at the time. Thomas closed his eyes. The words swirled. It wasn't fate. It wasn't some tragic coincidence. It was a decision. Someone chose to send Ash away, without a word, as if he were a broken object, a shadow no one wanted to face. And the last line, cut like a blade down his ribs. I never checked if he survived. Thomas staggered out of the storage unit, the envelope still clenched in his hand. Ash sat in the car, eyes following him, deep and knowing, as if he understood everything despite not speaking a word. Thomas slid into the driver's seat, but didn't start the car. He just sat there, quietly. For the first time since reuniting with Ash, he couldn't bring himself to look the animal in the eye. That night, in the motel room, still heavy with the scent of damp wood, Thomas sat on the floor. The letter lay on his knee, crumpled like a lifeline too frayed to hold. Ash, still recovering, but stronger now, slowly crept closer. No noise, no expression. He just placed a paw on Thomas's knee, light as a whisper, but heavy as the sky. No judgment, just presence, as if to say, "I'm still here." Thomas exhaled. His lips moved. "I didn't know, I swear. I never knew any of it." His voice cracked, as if he were confessing not to Ash, but to himself. Ash didn't react. He didn't need to, because staying was already the answer. Something had shifted. The shell of the old story had cracked. Thomas realized this wasn't just about a bobcat that once disappeared. It was about a soul that had survived, despite being forgotten, despite hunger, despite limping through the years, and still waiting. Thomas didn't know what hurt more, the 7 years lost, or the fact that Ash had lived every one of them alone. But now, he wasn't alone anymore, and neither was Thomas. That night he sat by the window, staring into a darkness that didn't just cover the sky but soaked into his skin. Martin's letter lay on the table, its edges torn from being read too many times. Each word was a stone on his chest. But what broke him wasn't the lie. It was the time. How many mornings had Ash woken up alone? How many storms had he endured with no hand to reach for? How many nights had he stayed silent, not because he couldn't speak, but because no one was left to listen? Ash lay at the foot of the bed, near the heater. His back rose and fell with breaths thin as thread. His eyes were closed, but not at peace. A paw twitched, an ear flicked, as if listening to something only he could hear. Not just pain, but a kind of waiting that had stretched too long. When Thomas reached out, Ash stirred. One eye opened, slow, wary, but not afraid. He lifted his head slightly, then placed a paw on Thomas's knee. Not to balance, not for affection, but something else. Forgiveness, without words. As if to say, "I knew you'd come back." Just that one gesture. But it shattered what Thomas had buried. For years, he'd buried his feelings under layers of logic, buried the pain beneath paperwork, signatures, and endless, unfinished journeys. But now, under the weak light of a motel room that smelled of old wood, none of that mattered, because Ash had waited, longer than anyone should have to. Scarred, hungry, betrayed, but he had never truly let go. That night, Thomas didn't sleep in the bed. He lay beside Ash, like a child curled into the last safe memory. Not sleeping, just listening to the heartbeat, fragile and fierce, pulsing with life again. In the dark, he whispered, "I'll find it all. I won't run anymore." By the time the sun crested the mountain ridge, they were already halfway to Hollow Creek. Not a grand journey, just rugged miles stretching between pine forests and the ghosts of the past. Thomas gripped the steering wheel tightly than usual, his jaw locked, bracing for truths he wasn't sure he was ready to face. Each time he glanced over, Ash was watching him. Not pleading, not questioning, just watching. as if he were guarding, not against danger, but against the fear that Thomas might vanish again. At the Hollow Creek Records office, the woman with half-rimmed glasses eyed him with suspicion when he asked for intake records on wildlife. "That data's not public," she said, fingers tapping the keyboard like interrogating it. Thomas pulled out Martin's old letter, folded to show only the note about transferring Ash. Her expression changed. "One moment," she said. 10 minutes later, she returned with a thin file folder that smelled of mold and regret. Case number 107. Male Bobcat. Age, adult. Temperament, withdrawn. Status, recommended for euthanasia. Thomas felt his throat tighten. But then, a tiny detail in the margin blew the dust off everything. Transfer denied. Signed, D. Keene. Thomas blinked. Keene. He flipped to the next page. An adoption request, scribbled signature, and a brief note. Not eating, no interaction, taken home for care. No address. Just one line. Teton Village. That was all. But it was enough. Back in the car, Thomas placed the file on the passenger seat and looked at Ash. "We're almost there." Ash didn't react much, just rested his chin on the dashboard, eyes fixed forward, as if the road had always been leading back here. Thomas didn't know who Daniel Keene was, or why he had stepped up when everyone else walked away, but someone had kept Ash alive when the world was ready to let him die. And that meant something. Not just survival, but memory is preserved. The road to Teton Village seemed to hide its final secrets. Pine trees bowed under the thin snow that had fallen the night before. The sky was a pale silver blue, the kind that only appears when winter truly begins. Thomas said little. Ash sat more upright than usual, ears perked, body tense at every change in the wind, as if he could sense who they were about to meet. The address came from a tax record search. Just one result: an old wooden cabin owned by Daniel Keene, now retired. No phone number, no formal residence listed. Just a name, a shelter file, and a sliver of hope Thomas didn't dare put into words. The cabin nestled among towering pines and shadowed hills, the kind of place where even sound whispered. The tires crunched over loose gravel. Thomas shut off the engine. Ahead were fogged windows, hidden behind overgrown brush untouched for a decade. He stepped out. Ash followed. No call needed. The door opened before he could knock. A tall man stood there, shoulders bent by age, beard white like tangled thread. But his eyes, still sharp as a blade. And when he saw Ash, those eyes changed. Not just recognition, but remembrance. "You brought him home," Daniel Keene said, voice barely louder than a breath. Thomas nodded, uncertain. Then the man followed into the house. Inside, it was simple to the point of aching. Firewood was stacked neatly beside the stove. A pair of boots was drying near the door. A rocking chair draped with an old wool blanket. The scent of dry pine and burnt coffee wove through the air. Daniel knelt down, slowly, with effort, to face Ash. And Ash stepped forward. No growling, no fear, only quiet respect. Two beings, each having survived silence, are now reunited without needing a single word. "I thought he was gone for good," Daniel said, his eyes never leaving Ash. "The last time he ran off, I figured he'd finally given up." Thomas whispered, "He never gave up. He was just finding his way back." "He wasn't mine," Daniel breathed. "He never was. He was always waiting for someone else." They sat in the kitchen, mismatched mugs cooling with untouched coffee. The story unfolded, not in order, but in breaths shaped by guilt and grace. Ash had once been marked for euthanasia, too difficult to manage, too damaged. No one wanted him. No one believed he could survive outside the forest. But Daniel had seen something different, a creature that didn't snarl or destroy, just sat in the cage, eyes gazing outward as if waiting for a door that had never opened. Daniel opened it. He brought Ash home. Didn't name him, didn't train him, just let him exist. But Ash had never really stayed. He always ran off at night, Daniel said. Always headed east, toward Jackson. I'd find him by the highway, standing there, looking out like he was waiting for someone to appear. Then he stood, walked to a wooden drawer, rummaged for a moment, and pulled out a small item wrapped in plastic. I found this once in the fur around his neck, right after I brought him home. Seems like it had been there a long time. Thomas took it and froze. An old photograph. Blurry, but unmistakable. It was him, barely in his 20s, standing beside Ash in front of the old house. No pose, no setup, just a moment frozen in time. Daniel said nothing, just placed the photo in his hand. Emotions surged like a rising tide. Everything Thomas had tried to forget returned, resting squarely in his palm. It wasn't just that Ash had survived. He had remembered. He wouldn't let me throw that photo away, Daniel said quietly. He kept hiding it under the blanket, like he knew it meant something. The room sank into silence. Not the silence of strangers, but the kind that follows when something finally comes full circle. Thomas looked toward the fireplace. Ash lay there, no longer tense, no longer bracing. That peaceful posture wasn't from fatigue. It was from returning. His heart beat faster. Not from fear, but from realization. All those years, he doubted himself. Feared that what he and Ash had shared was just imagined, a memory warped by grief. But now, in a stranger's home, with an old photograph in hand and Ash sleeping soundly for the first time in years, he knew. Ash had never waited in vain. He had been waiting for him. The road back to Jackson was quiet, but Thomas's mind was not. The photograph Daniel had handed him burned in his coat pocket, a piece of memory on paper but heavy as stone. He couldn't stop thinking about all that had just come to light, about a stranger who had held on to what his own blood had chosen to discard, about how Ash had survived not on instinct but on memory, and above all, the truth, circling him like a ghost, gaining shape, pressing in, demanding to be named. When he drove into town, the sky was washed in deep indigo. Thomas didn't return to the motel. He drove straight to Martin's office. The lights were still on. Martin was there, hunched over stacks of tax files and manila folders, glasses slipping down his nose. When Thomas pushed the door open, Ash followed him in, and Martin looked up, startled. "I need you to tell the truth." Thomas placed the photo on the desk. All of it. No more circling around. No more excuses. Martin stared at the picture. Color drained from his face like water from an open wound. His hand trembled as he adjusted his glasses, then leaned back, slumping into the chair like a fortress finally breached. "How did you get this?" "From the man who saved him, after you discarded him." Martin closed his eyes. "I didn't discard him. I just tried to protect you." "From what?" Martin sighed, like he'd been waiting for this moment for years. "From the guilt." "What are you talking about?" Thomas's hands clenched. Martin stood, walked to the steel cabinet at the back of the room and opened the bottom drawer. Pulled out a small box, full of old keys, crumpled bills, and a USB drive. "After the accident, Ash kept scratching at your father's office door, every night, same spot, same sound. I thought he was grieving, but something was off. I opened it one day and found scratch marks right beneath the desk. Thomas clenched his jaw as he took the USB. And you buried it. Martin didn't argue. He looked down, silent, like a confession without words. That night, Thomas returned to the motel. Laptop open, USB trembling in his hand. Ash lay near the heater, eyes half closed, but never leaving him. The screen lit up. The footage appeared blurry, but visible. His father's office. Time stamp, the night of the accident. A shadow. Not his father. Not his mother. A man. Entering. Ash barked madly behind the glass door. The man placed something beneath the desk, then turned off the light. Quietly disappeared through the back door. A few hours later, the crash. Thomas paused the video, rewound, zoomed in. It was him, a family friend, a business associate. A man who had sat beside him at the funeral placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "We'll get through this." And Ash had seen it. Ash had tried to warn them, had scratched, had cried, had waited, and in return was cast away, as if the truth in his eyes was too unbearable for anyone to face. Thomas sat in the darkness. The screen's glow split his face, half in light, half in shadow. Ash quietly approached and rested his head on Thomas's knee. No words needed, just presence, as if to say, "I told you, long ago." And Thomas knew, in that moment, Ash had never been silent. It was just, no one had been willing to listen. For the first time in years, Thomas didn't feel lost anymore. He felt angry. He felt clear. He felt ready. The silence that both man and Bobcat had carried for 7 long years was finally ready to be broken. The next morning, sunlight poured over the mountaintops like a soft confession. Thomas stood on the motel porch, coffee untouched in his hand, one palm resting on Ash's back. The two stared toward the horizon where light and truth were waiting. Silence was no longer a burden. It was the quiet that comes after a storm has said its piece. That morning, Thomas took the video to the sheriff's office. No drama. No demand for justice. He didn't want revenge. He just wanted a tangible ending. The sheriff, older than he looked, but with the kind of eyes you only earn after years of holding things in, watched the footage with a clenched jaw and a tight mouth. Then he set down his coffee cup and gave a single nod. "We've been quiet long enough." Within the hour, a formal investigation was opened. Thomas didn't stick around to watch the wheels of justice turn. He didn't need to. The truth had finally been spoken. What had once been buried, out of fear, convenience, or cowardice, was now out in the open, and the man responsible could no longer hide. Not because Thomas demanded it, but because Ash, through his gaze, his scratches, and his unwavering presence over 7 years, had always pointed toward the truth. That afternoon, Thomas drove to the old house, the place where everything began. The same porch roof, the same chipped wooden steps, tilted walls, and the scent of rusted memories in the air. But this time, it didn't feel haunted. It felt honest, and somehow that was harder. Ash stepped out of the car with a steadiness Thomas hadn't seen before. No hesitance, no caution. He climbed the porch, turned and sat down in the exact spot he once waited day after day when no one ever returned. But this time, he wasn't waiting. He had come home. Thomas joined him silently. He sat down beside him as if entering a temple, pulled the photo from his coat, the one Daniel had kept all these years. He placed it between them, still facing the woods. You brought me back. You remembered what I forgot, and you held on. Long enough for both of us. Ash tilted his head, gently leaning against Thomas's shoulder. Not a dramatic gesture, not a moment of climax, just presence. Warm, solid, enough. A kind of loyalty that wasn't trained but forged in fire, stitched together by time and sealed with forgiveness. Afterward, they moved to a small house on the edge of town where the forest began and humanity ended. A place just far enough for Ash to breathe, and just close enough for Thomas to sleep without dreaming of the crash. Life narrowed to simple things. Mornings are filled with birdsong and the scent of pine. Afternoons with hot rice bowls, evenings under the stars, and a quiet, not of loneliness, but of having nothing left to run from. Neighbors called them the inseparable pair. Ash never strayed far. Thomas never had to call. That wasn't a command. It was understanding. Ash aged. His steps slowed, but his gaze remained deep. A silent presence, steady as ancient stone, worn by time but never erased. Then one winter morning, after they walked together through frost-dusted fields, Ash lay down on the wooden steps. His head rested on Thomas's thigh. And he didn't rise again. No sound, no pain, just peace. The kind of peace that comes only after every storm has passed, the kind that can't be given, only lived through and earned. Thomas sat there for a long time. His hand rested on warm fur already beginning to cool. No tears, no movement, just a whisper of one word. Thank you. And the world, in the quietest and most sacred way, paused. Because sometimes those once forgotten don't return. To be remembered, but to help us remember ourselves.